Hello all. I literally just returned from a wonderful morning in a multi-faith conference that I was involved in planning and putting on and sharing with people, and it was just such a lovely experience. On a high, I'm also kind of tired and energized and exhausted and everything all at the same time. So, Parshat Shelach Lecha, the desert can make us grow. Full disclosure, this is a recasting of a Devar Torah sheet where I gave 5 years ago, pre-COVID, or BC, before COVID. Now we're in CE, COVID era, and here we are in our COVID world. It is not post-COVID. And I think it's most important to remind ourselves about the many deserts that we traverse and the confusion they may bring in our lives, especially as many of us are feeling dejected and lost in so many different ways in our world today. Back when I was teaching kids of a younger age, I had been learning and sharing a great deal about deserts in my various classes, both those that are physical and those that are spiritual, searing our souls. When I asked my wonderful first and second graders at Perlman Jewish Day School, including some of your children who may be listening to this right now, what is a physical desert, they could give me many details. Heat, lack of water and food, exhaustion, no Wawas or convenience stores, no technology, no means of communication, no cell phones, and so on. Then we turned our attention to what it means to be in a spiritual desert, to feel utterly and totally and unimaginably lost. And they expressed the potential for being sad, not knowing what to do, and so on. This feeling was amplified with my adult students in those learning circles, many talking about spiritual deserts that follow them their entire lives. And this is where we begin our study of Sefer Bamidbar today. Deserts can be quite necessary and important to our souls. Think of those who go off to retreats in quiet and solitary places. What exactly is it that deserts are supposed to do for us? Does this experience cleanse us? Does it provide an opportunity for us to regroup and consider who we are and who we are supposed to be? What exactly may it have been intended to, and did it do for the Bnei Israel? As Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono L'Shalom, teaches, the desert experience of the Bnei Israel served a fundamental and transformative purpose, without which the Jewish narrative as we know it may not have been able to continue. It takes more than a few days or weeks to turn a population of slaves into a nation capable of handling the responsibilities of freedom. In the case of the Israelites, what was needed was a generation that was born in liberty, hardened by the experience of the desert, untrammeled by habits of servitude. Freedom takes time, and there are no shortcuts. Often it takes a very long time indeed. This dimension of time is fundamental to the Jewish view of politics and human progress. That is why in the Torah, Moshe repeatedly tells the adults to educate their children, to tell them the story of the past, to remember. It is why the covenant itself is extended throughout time, handed on from one generation to the next. It is why the story of the Israelites is told at such length in our Tanakh. Unlike Christianity or Islam, there is in Judaism no sudden transformation of the human condition. No one moment or single generation in which everything significant is fully disclosed. Why, asks Rambam Maimonides in the Guide, Book 3, chapter 32, Guide for the Perplexed, did God not simply give the Israelites in the desert the strength or self-confidence they needed to cross the Jordan and enter the land? Even God, implies Maimonides, has to work with the grain of human nature and its all too slow pace of change. Not because God cannot change people. Of course God could if God wanted to. God created them. God could recreate them. Us. The reason is that God chooses not to. Otherwise we would not be able to use the human capacity to choose which we were given and is our most important possession. Emmanuel Levinas, a 20th century philosopher, taught at length about the difficulty inherent in freedom. Freedom, taught Levinas, needs time and education, and above all, patience. Sachs wants us to consider that the story of the Meraglim that we have in our Parsha, the spies, the scouts, tells us that the generation who left Egypt were not yet ready for the next chapter of their lives and needed this time and education that were about to occur. While this lack of freedom may have been their tragedy, their consolation would be that their children would hopefully be ready for it. Even the leaders could not see past the challenges that the land offered, as any good opportunity would entail, and consider the potential and the possibilities that were there to be discovered. Rather, the majority of these leaders come back conveying fear and lack of confidence. They do not act as the leaders that they were intended to be. They could not do so. So therefore, how much more so would this be the case for the Bnei Israel? We note that in spite of Moshe's leading questions, which was to give them parameters and goals for their tasks, they were overwhelmed by the bigness of it all. The people were too big, the fruits were too big, the land was too much. In their eyes, they stayed. V'sham ra'inu et ha'nefilim b'nei anak min ha'nefilim v'nihi be'einenu kechagavim v'chein hayinu be'einayim shalem. We saw these giants. To us, we looked like mere grasshoppers. Even more so, how must they have seen us? This is fear talking. This is panic that gets expressed, not the objective report that they were requested to bring about the land. So, do they fall short as leaders? Or is there a more important message about their humanity here? Before we can consider them or anyone else our leaders, we must look at them as the solitary human beings they are, just like the rest of us. Our leaders bring their whole selves to their leadership, which was something that I just shared with people of many faiths in this morning's conference. Soren Kierkegaard explains as follows: when we take a religious person, the night of hidden inwardness, and place him in the existence medium, a contradiction will appear as he relates himself to the world around him, and he himself must become aware of this. The contradiction does not consist in his being different from everyone else, but the contradiction is that he, with all his inwardness hidden within him, with his pregnancy of suffering and benediction in his inner being, looks just like all the others, and the inwardness is indeed hidden simply by his looking exactly like the others. In other words, the leaders of the tribe, chosen for whatever criteria, would reflect the rest of Bnei Yisrael just as they would be reflected by the masses. What are they called? Anashim, people. This is a most important element of leadership. Rabbi Sachs teaches that it is not the one who instigates or initiates an action or undertaking that is the true leader to watch. Rather, the ones who immediately follow and rally the forces of the rest of the group. Here, the leaders chosen, the group of 10, fall short. True to form, national hysteria follows. We read immediately after this statement of complete self-deprecation as follows: and all of the congregation, Vatisa Kol Ha'ida, lifted their voice, Vayutnu et Kulam, and they gave their voice, Vayibchu Ha'am Balayla Hahu, and they cried that night. They wept, Bachu, and all the children murmured, Vayalinu al Moshe v'Aharon. They complained against Moshe and against Aharon and the whole congregation and said, why didn't you just leave us to die in Egypt? Now we're going to die in this wilderness? And why does God bring us into this land to fall by the sword? Remember, of the Anakim, of the giants. Our wives and our little ones will be prey. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt? At this point, Moshe and Aharon fall on their faces, and Caleb and Yehoshua tear their garments, a sign of mourning, reflecting their state of anguish. How does this group and their leaders move on from this point of desperation and complete abandonment in the desert of their minds and their souls? It is at this point that God decrees that this group will not be the ones to enter Eretz Yisrael, and they will wander and wander and wander some more in the desert for 40 years. Dr. D.W. Ekstrand, a Christian theologian, teaches the value of the wilderness experience. He explains as follows. Anyone who travels the spiritual path of sanctification will ultimately discover something known as the wilderness experience. What exactly is it? And why does it happen to those who are faithful to God and who try to live their lives in harmony with God's will? The Bible frequently addresses this issue. Scripture often depicts the experience of God's presence or blessing with the imagery of water, streams, oases, and rivers. And we have spoken about that. Conversely, it describes times of distress, doubt, and alienation from God with the imagery of a desert or wilderness. And here we are in our book, Bamidbar, in the desert. The wilderness is where water is scarce and where wild animals live. In a spiritual wilderness, God feels far away, distant, absent, unresponsive. Faith feels doubtful or uncertain. We feel alone, vulnerable, lost, unprotected. Here we find the fear of hopelessness and the unknown. Ekstrand goes on to speak about the value of triumphing over this experience as a character-building element of maturity. Similarly, Maimonides explains in his Guide to the Perplexed, Section 3, Chapter 32, that it is a well-known fact that traveling in the desert, being deprived of physical enjoyment, such as bathing and the like, subjecting the body to the wildlife, produces courage. An antithetical lifestyle of prosperity and material comfort, on the other hand, creates weak character. But that was not enough. God realized that the first generation of Jewish adults born and raised in Egyptian slavery and oppression would never be able to undergo the profound psychological metamorphosis needed to develop the spirit of liberty. The slave mentality had become too deeply ingrained in their psyches. During the wanderings, however, another generation arose, one that had not been accustomed to degradation and slavery. Maimonides writes, God realized that it would take a generation born and raised in freedom to possess the courage required to fight the battles of conquest and create a Jewish society on the soil of the land of their forefathers. What was the greatest goal of this experience? Those first and second graders of mine years ago, who are now probably they're, I guess, 7th and 8th graders now maybe, or something like that, understood that the Bnei Yisrael had to work through the reality that it may have been their lack of faith in God that led to the lack of faith in self, notwithstanding the reaction of the leaders. There's even a drush on the word mimenu there. Certainly they are bigger than us, and some say mimenu can either be us or him. So are they saying that they are bigger, the forces that we have to confront are bigger than us, or are they saying the forces are bigger than God? Leaders know that they have a responsibility to the people for engendering confidence and conveying a sense of security. But this is not what happened. In chapter 13, verse 31, as the scouts report, countering what Caleb tries to convey to halt the coming hysteria, Yahas Caleb et ha'am. So Caleb tried to still the people and said, we should go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. And what do the people say? Lo nuchal la'alot, ki chazak hu mimenu. We're not able to go because some force, whatever that is stronger than us or than God. Rashi and others support this idea, and they suggest that the force that the inhabitants of the land are stronger than is not them, but God, the creator of all. How can this be? How could the Bnei Israel have lost their way in such a fundamental means? Is this what they wanted to convey to their children? It is here that it is ordained that these children will be educated by the wilderness experience and build the character and fortitude it will take to truly live as free people. They will not carry the fear and spiritual paralysis of their parents into the next generation and new life that will be given by those generations will live. Let us consider these verses of our Parshat together. If the Lord desires us, im chafetz banu Hashem, ve'hevi otanu al eretz hazot, v'natnu lanu eretz asher hu zvat chalav u'dvash, and will bring us to this land, to a land full with milk and honey, you shall not rebel against God. Badoshem al timradu, you will not fear the people of the land, for they are as our bread. Their protection is removed from them, and God is with us. Do not fear harm. You should not have this fear. And Rashi amplifies the idea here that don't just look at what you're seeing in the moment. Try to project you're coming in with the force of God. Imenu here means both. They're not bigger than you. They're not bigger than us. They're not bigger than God. We're bigger because we are together. We're a force to be contended with. We will be victorious. And what happens here? The entire congregation, goes to threaten to stone them. But the glory of God appeared in the tent of meeting to all the children of Israel. And Joshua and Caleb were protected from the stones. God then says to the people, Ad ana yana'atani ha'am hazeh, ad ana lo yaminu bi. God understands that it's God that they've lost faith in. How long will this people provoke me? How long will they not believe after all the signs I've given them? I will strike them with a plague. Akenu b'davar. I will annihilate them, and then I will make you into a greater nation. Moshe then says to God, that's not the best idea. The Egyptians will hear that you have brought this nation out from its midst with great power. They will hear that you killed them. You don't want to do that. Notice what the motivation that Moshe provides to give God and to bring God and the Bnei Yisrael back together. A completely external motivation. What will the neighbors think? How will this look to others? In other words, as the God, Moshe and crew, Aharon, Caleb, Joshua, and Bnei Yisrael, connection is broken. Now the focus is on how is it going to look to the outside when they see this chain is no longer strong. This is clearly not a productive direction in which to move. So how do all concerned recalibrate and return to a constructive path? We return to Kierkegaard for a moment. One must first learn to know himself or herself before knowing anything else. Not until a person has inwardly understood themselves and then sees the course that he or she is to take does one's life gain peace and meaning. Only then is that person free of that irksome, sinister, traveling companion, that irony of life, which manifests itself in the sphere of knowledge and invites true knowing to begin with a not knowing. Fear. Frequently, it seems to let a veil of forgetfulness fall over the past, only to make every single trifle appear in a strong light again. In other words, losing perspective. And Kierkegaard ends this quote with, frequently, a person feels one's very best when the challenge is most profound, and he alone must meet it. Notice that we're not talking here about individual reactions. They rebelled. They said. This is crowd mentality taking over here. You have Moshe, Aharon, Caleb, Joshua, you have God. But then you've got the crowd. You've got the 10 Meraglim, and then you've got the crowd. We must know ourselves. As individuals, we must know ourselves. Our leaders must know themselves. Otherwise, we cannot be effective, and we cannot act within the collective. In the desert, this self-awareness is most likely to happen. For as Albert Einstein often taught, it is through the experience of nature that we come to best understand and know ourselves. Just as the desert experience would help the generation of slaves who panicked instead of seeing the potential of Eretz Yisrael to cleanse themselves from that panic, it would also birth a new generation ready to face the challenges that it takes to be a free people who use that freedom to build what would hopefully be a just society, informed by profound and deeply rooted faith in God, who protected them while they may have experienced their own personal spiritual deserts. May we all consider this as we face challenges and as we look around us to see who's watching us as we deal with our challenges. If we think about that and know that we have that sense of self-awareness and the strength of our faith in God, may all of this help us approach the deserts of our lives with that understanding so that we emerge stronger. Anachnu. We should be the ones who have the chizuk, the strength, not the anakim, not the scary ones who confront us. Lehitraat and Shabbat Shalom.